What's up, gangsters? How about episode 19 of this little Spitfire project? This one is going to be a continuation of the weathering efforts that I've been doing. And I know some of you guys I've been looking forward to seeing some exhaust stains. Those are about to happen. And I know you're like, one guy was like, man, I've been waiting for this entire time just to see the exhaust stains. Yeah, me too. One of my favorite parts of any aircraft project, and it takes forever to get there sometimes. But before that, let me do a question, because this is a good one, and it fits right in with what I'm working on right now. So this is from Brian Gilgan. He says, great video as always, thank you. Oil paint curing time has been something that's bothered me for a while, so I recently sat down and tried to figure it out. I leached a couple colors of ep284 on cardboard and then mixed them as thick washes, some with sans odor, some with enamel thinner, and some with ep284 matte effect thinner. Painted a bunch of numbers, one for each day, on a primed and painted piece of styrene, and let it sit. Each morning I rubbed at the next number to see how it was doing. It took 5 days before nothing would rub off, regardless of thinner or color. To be clear, I was painting over a surface painted with model color metallics because that's what I'm working on at the moment. I think that makes drying time longer, but I don't think it affects curing time. I don't know if this is at all helpful, blah blah blah. So anyway, there's a couple of things here that I think are relevant. First of all, different brands definitely have different drying times with oils. And you'll see this very clearly. And it's a matter of not only what type of oils they use, but what type of resins they use. As I've mentioned before, if it's an alkyd resin, it's going to dry quite a bit faster. The other thing that I've mentioned is that different colors take different amounts of time. For example, like you'll see in this video, it seems like the umbers dry pretty quickly, but whites not so much. Like I've got a little dish here. This has some of each of those things in it in varying amounts. They've been in here for a couple of days, and this white, which happens to be zinc white, pretty much not dry at all. The little pile of umber, raw umber, not totally dry, but definitely much more dry. And where I mixed it in with the white at a real thin consistency, that's all dry. Like I'm just scraping on it. I've got some Michael Harding gray, neutral gray in here, totally different brand. It's been sitting here for the same amount of time as the white, and it's pretty rubbery. Then I've got some Winsor & Newton student grade yellow ochre that I squirted in there yesterday. Not dry at all. So again, there's just a lot of factors there, totally dependent. There is no single rule, and I hope that what you guys have been able to see through watching this is that the idea that oils take forever, because that's what everybody always says, is not strictly true. All right, like when I painted the letters that you'll see on the fuselage here, I did those with Winsor & Newton Artist Titanium White. Took, I think, 4 days before I was totally confident that those letters were dry, but they were painted at basically full density. The stains that I've been working on, they're pretty much good to go the next day. And here's an important point. One of the reasons that I like working with lacquers is because when I go on top of an oil paint stain with something like GX113 or dull coat that's been thinned with regular hardware store lacquer thinner, it doesn't even matter if it's completely cured out, because the lacquer is going to melt it down into the surface anyway, and it's going to be all good. If you're working with acrylic clears, you have to be a little bit more careful, because if you put an acrylic clear on top of an oil that is not fully cured out, you could end up having a bad time. So anyway, I appreciate that question. That was good, perfectly timed. Anyway, let's get on to it. Let's do some more weathering. Okay, so here we are back on the top side of this little bird, and let's see, what have I done since the last clip? I went ahead and installed the landing gear, got all that in, went in pretty good. The panel on the starboard side, the white one that goes around the landing gear, was a little bit tight. Had to relieve the edges of that just a little bit, not much, and I'm sure that was on me, but all's well that ends well, and everything in there I think looks pretty good. You know, it's just one of the things that, in my opinion, really defines Tamiya over every other brand, and that's even the suggestion that you could do half a dozen painting operations on landing gear parts without even taking them off the sprue, and then not only expect that they're going to fit properly when you do put them in, but be a little surprised if they don't. This is just a fantastic kit, just wonderfully engineered and toleranced and everything. Also put the tail wheel in, and I can see that I have a mold seam line that I did not properly take care of, so I'm gonna have to deal with that. Not a big deal. It may just get a bunch of dirt on it. But anyhow, that takes care of the bottom. All that's been unglossed, and I've unglossed the entire top surface. And you'll notice that there are a couple of additions up here as well. I'm gonna I'll just turn the plane rather than the camera. And you can see that we have some new items right here by the cockpit. So, Birdie. I've seen quite a few photographs where guys painted names on this part of the aircraft, and it's typically done better. But I kind of like the hand-painted look, and this is something that I've been wanting to try for quite a while. And it was not easy. I did it using Winsor & Newton oil so that I could erase it if it didn't work out, and it did not for the first few times. It was very difficult. And it's certainly not perfect, but I think it's representative. Didn't get a lot of protests of outrage from the gang, so I think it's good. And I did try to cut some masks for that, but it is just way too tiny for that lettering style. The other thing is, got a couple of kill marks there, and unfortunately the only way to do those was with decals. And I actually cut those out of a 1/32 scale Special Hobby Tempest decal sheet. And yeah, I mean, with a decal that small, the film height is just so huge relative to the overall size of the decal that it just sticks out like a sore thumb. And I had to put some work in on that. I did some blending with paint around it using my Sotar, then buried it in GX113, did some sanding, and I think it's good. I don't feel like there's any edges showing there, and I'm pretty pleased with that. But it was a test. It was a push. But I had to do it because when you've got, especially you've got decals that have absolutely no film, you really don't have any choice because any film is going to stick out like a sore thumb. So glad I got that taken care of. So now it's time to talk exhaust stains. That is the next big step in the weathering process. So with Spitfires, like Mustangs, they have a very characteristic shape for these stains that's defined by the airflow. And it's pretty easy to see that this is all about the shape of the airfoil, but it's also affected by where the exhaust is relative to the airfoil cross-section. Like what you see with Mustangs is that because the pipes kind of blow down, but you've got them as far ahead of the leading edge as they are, the stain kind of goes, underneath the stacks and then immediately swoops back up and makes this curve as it follows that airflow. And it tends to stay pretty narrow on Mustangs. Now, with Spitfires, you get a similar effect, but it's different because when you look at where the stacks are relative to the leading edge, most of the exhaust is coming out, and this is, hopefully I can get this done without glare on this. Most of the exhaust is coming out behind where the leading edge is. So what you get is something more like this. And it tends to fan out more on Spitfires. Sorry about the glare. Anyway, that's the kind of the basic shape right there. And you see it, to varying degrees. Some Spitfires don't have it at all, because like every plane, sometimes they stopped and cleaned it off. But what you definitely do see that's different is with earlier marks of Spit, Mark 1s, 2s, 5s, that have this type of exhaust stacks, you don't see the staining as heavy as you do with like the Mark 9s, where it's got the 6 stacks on each side that sit much closer to the fuselage. The stains tend to be heavier with those than on the earlier ones, but the shape is still basically the same. And it's also defined by kind of being multicolored. When it's not real heavy or the aircraft is a light color, like with a Mustang, for example, all you really kind of see is this sort of dark smudge that goes along here. But with Spitfires, especially where you've got the green and the brown, you'll see that there's a kind of a different color in the middle that fades away as you work back, and it's a light grayish tannish gray, whatever you want to call it. But what that is the black part, or the dark brown part, as I like to make it, is just kind of basically the soot. It's it's carbon. The lighter part is tetraethyl lead, which, if you don't know, was the additive. That's the difference between leaded fuel and unleaded fuel. We don't have that anymore because, cancer and shit. But tetraethyl lead was used to jack the octane up to 100 octane. And it's an unburnt byproduct of the combustion cycle. And you get a lot of that collecting along here. And it adds a very cool multi-dimensional look to the stain on these things, especially when they're running lean and hard and they don't have a lot of oil in the exhaust, not a lot of fuel richness. So that's my plan, and what I like to do with these is lay down the base using a brownish black, and establish that shape, and then come back and do the lighter colored part of it using oils. So, how to do that? And this is where the inks come in, and this is the specific reason why I started messing with these inks, because the exhaust stain is really, to me, one of the things that is super characteristic of these aircraft. Obviously you don't have to have one at all if you don't want one, if you don't like the way they look. But to me, there's few things that add a sense of realism and authenticity. But it's easy to screw them up, and the penalty is high because it is right there in your face, right there where everybody's looking at it. And so, you have to be confident in your airbrushing and your oil work. And if you screw up and you have to remove it, that can get scary. And so the thing with that, I started experimenting with these inks is that the videos I watched demonstrated that you can remove these with water, and then of course, as I showed in the last video segment, something like 409, even better. So it's essentially penalty free. You can work at it as much as you need to, and if you don't like it, then you can just wash it off and do it again, no matter how many times that takes. So what I have here is a blend of, this is 2.5 mils of IPA with 1 drop of carbon black Liquitex ink and 3 drops of the raw umber. And there's more raw umber because it's a transparent and it needs more to get the strength. So as you can see, when I shake it up there, it's kind of a brownish black. So I've got my Sotar set up. I'm shooting at about 10 psi, and I've already done the other side, so you can kind of see what's happening there. I've already laid it down over here, and I'm pretty happy with it. You can see it's, it's relatively subtle, but again, I don't want it to be really dramatic. I just want it to be there and look authentic. And I think I may strengthen this a little bit. There's some places back here in the back in the back where I think I want it to be a little bit heavier. But overall, I'm pretty happy with that. And what I really liked about that was that I was able to just work on that for like 10 minutes and just continue to spray it and just gradually build it up until I had it where I liked it. I really got it dialed in. And so I'm going to do that on the other side. And I'm going to talk through like the first part of it, but then I'll probably just go quiet and then do fast motion on the camera, because on the video rather, because it takes forever, and I don't, I'm not going to subject you guys to watching the whole thing at real speed. It just takes too long. It's literally like watching paint dry. So okay, so you can see I barely have any ink coming out of the airbrush, and that's exactly the way that I want it. And this is where you guys have to bear with me, because my dexterity is a real problem here. Keeping my finger on the trigger properly is a challenge. So what I'm talking about with landmarks is, obviously I know where the thing starts. That's right here. Now I also know that it tends to cross over this panel line junction kind of in the lower quarter, right there behind, aft of where the last letter of birdie is, and then cross back here and trail away onto the rear of the fuselage, and then kind of mirror that on the bottom side. So what I'm going to do, and it's important when you're spraying upside down, to just focus on that shape. And you have to figure out what the right distance is based on the density of your material. And that can be a little bit difficult when it's hard to see. Like right now, yeah, I'm not getting any out. I'm gonna have to stop and occasionally, even with these inks being as thin as they are, you have to unplug the thing. Alright, here we go. Now I'm getting some action. And it's important to keep moving smoothly. And concentrate on making that shape happen. The beauty of doing it this way is that if you have a little bit of a hitch in your giddy up, that the shading is so gradual that it's not going to show too much. But you have to be careful, especially when your spot size is small, and that's one of the reasons why I'm as far away as I am, because the spot size needs to be large enough that you don't get little heavy spots. All right, so you can see how I'm building it up. It's just gradually happening, and so far I feel like I'm doing okay. It's been a little ugly getting in the groove. For me to get my grip on this thing and control that button is just super frustrating for me. I have to constantly stop, grab the airbrush, flex my fingers up, and get re-gripped. My finger just doesn't want to stay on there properly the whole time. So, it is what it is, though. Got to fight my way through it. It's worth it in the long run. But I hope you guys see that if I can manage to pull this off, as ham-fisted as I am, that just about anybody ought to be able to. It's important every now and then to stop, take a breath, and flip it over and look at it right side up and see how you're doing. Because it's very easy to just get so stuck into it that you can start to build an error into the pattern that you're not really seeing until it's never really too late, because you can always, like I said, you can always fix it. But you know what I'm saying. It's always better to not have to start over if you don't have to start over. So there we go. That's how things are going right now, and I'm pretty pleased with this. I'm happy with the way that it's kind of darkening up where Birdie is painted on there. That was my intent. That's why I painted that thing with such a bright white tone. And so now I'm going to just keep tuning on this a little bit, and then we'll look at it when I decide I'm done. All right, I feel like I'm good with this, and let me show you where it's at. So that's what we've got. I like it. I think the shape is there. It's defined enough, but it's obvious but still subtle. And I think that's what I want. So, I mean, I really don't have to let it dry, because it's already dry, and I could do the next step, which is going to be to lock that in with some GX113. But as usual, what I'm going to do now is just let that talk to me for a little bit. Just come back to the bench later, look at it some more, see kind of what I think. Just make sure I'm happy with it before I lock it in, because if I decide I don't like it after I put some clear lacquer on it, then that will be a challenge. But one thing I want to say is part of the reason this is successful is I'm using a really small needle. This is a 0.2 millimeter needle, and it's not so much that you need to be able to spray really small lines or a really small spot, but it's that it needs to atomize really, really well. And I did some testing with my 0.35 needle in my Iwata Neo, and it just was not as subtle and nice as it is with this. So, something to think about. Okay, so back to exhaust stains. I decided that I was happy with them, and so I went ahead and locked it in with some dull coat last night. Not dull coat, sorry, I'm using GX113 on this, but that is now a permanent fixture. So the next stage is to add some lighter staining from the aforementioned tetraethyl lead deposits. And so what I'm doing there is I've already done it on this side, so you can kind of see what my goal is. Now these can be anywhere from this, from light gray to tan. And what it basically comes down to is how fresh they are. This stuff was essentially just a surface deposit. It was kind of an ash that got rubbed off or washed off very easily. But if it stayed then and got more carbon on top of it, then it would tend to have a browner or a more tan tone to it. So it's really whatever you want, if you want it there at all. I like it. I think it adds an extra dimension and looks cool. So what I've got here is a little bit of, I've got some Winsor Newton titanium white, some Michael Harding neutral gray, which I decided not to use, and then I've got some Abteilung 502 cream brown, which is a great color, very handy for exhaust stuff. And as you can see, I've mixed a bit of it together over in the middle there. So what I'm going to do, I've got this, another one of my favorite things. This is the Royal and Langnickel #2 combo. It says SG3020 on it, but if I recall correctly, when you find it on Amazon or Dick Blick or whatever, it's the #2 combo. It's basically, I don't know why they call it a combo. It's basically a filbert, just a little bit longer maybe than a normal filbert. And it is a great little brush for doing all kinds of oil paint rendering. So what I want to do on this is almost like dry brushing. So on the tip of the brush, I'm going to just load that up, and then I'm going to remove most of it, just like I would for dry brushing. And my cue is when I'm wiping it back and forth here and I don't see any more coming off on the rag. And at that point, I think I'm ready to go. Just have to get a grip on this little thing. And hopefully I can do this on camera and not make too much of a mess out of it. Okay, so, all right, we are on camera. So I'm going to just start here. And start adding this color into the center of the pattern. What I kind of like is to have a bit of it, to have it sort of focused in the middle, so that there's a little bit of an edge of the darker brown showing, if that makes sense. You'll see here in a second. So again, just kind of defining the shape a little bit more. And now that I've got that basically where I want it, now I'm going to come back and start just blending and refining, and I'm just kind of scrubbing it in here. And not worrying too much about it being perfect or perfectly uniform, because again, this was the result of a natural phenomenon, and so it wasn't always going to be exactly uniform. So you can see how I'm kind of tailing it off here towards the back, and I feel like this is pretty good. This is about what I want at this point. So what I'm going to do now is my same thing with this giant filbert. And I'm going to start just working that a little bit, blending it, and you can see what this brush does. It tones it down a bit, softens it, gives it a kind of a natural edge, and I feel pretty good about that. I kind of don't like the way it looks like it ends a bit abruptly here. So what I'm going to do is go back to this brush and just bring a little bit more of a gradual fade to it. If there is a rule about exhaust stains, it's that they shouldn't do anything abruptly. One thing that I see a lot of guys do that I would call a mistake is ending them without really letting it fade out. It's kind of a subtle thing, but I think it's important to keeping it looking authentic. So anyway, that's the basic thing there. I still have a little bit of a problem here. I don't like the way that's finishing up there towards the end of it. So I'm going to get a clean brush. This little chisel looks like it might work okay, and I'm going to work that a little bit again to just fade it out, blend it in. There we go. I think that's better. Hopefully you guys agree. But this is also the kind of thing where I will now just kind of let it sit for a while and, like I said, let it talk to me, see how I feel about it. I think it's good. At least it's a good start. It's a pretty decent match for the other side. You can only look at one side at a time, so they don't have to be a perfect match, but they shouldn't be grossly different. And I feel like I'm in pretty decent shape here. So that's that. Now, time to move on or move back to something else. All right, you may have noticed that I have these. That I've made some changes, or some additions rather, to these patches over the gun openings. All right, so what's going on there? All right, what I've seen in a number of my reference photos where they clearly used doped linen as the covers for these. In other words, they didn't use the ready-made patches or tape. Is that you'll see this kind of an outline that, to me, pretty clearly suggests that it was, you know, hand painted on there. Well, it obviously had to be. That it was, you know, it had multiple layers because they applied it, reapplied it, etc. It got worn off, it got removed, whatever. Anyway, I'm not 100% certain what the color is because, you know, a lot of the photos are just not really clear or they're in black and white. I've got a really good one that shows the effect, but it makes it look like that outline is maybe dark brown or something. I decided that I didn't really want to do that and that I liked this lighter outline that kind of shows some fading, and I kind of worked that into the patch itself. And what I used for that is I just mixed up some Mission Models acrylic to about what I thought was a good color. Thinned it with some of their thinner, and painted it on there with one of these super cool little Anna's brushes that he's done in partnership with Colibri. And you can see, I think I've mentioned these before. It's got a tip on it that's not really a pointed tip, but works good for kind of everyday acrylic detail painting. I like it for those, that type of thing. So that takes care of that. And now it's time to go back to doing some airbrushed ink, because I still need some gunpowder stains on these gun ports. So I've mixed up a little bit of ink. This is about 2.5 mils of IPA with 1 drop of the carbon black Liquitex in it. And I'm gonna put that in my Sotar and go to town. And then once I get warmed up and make sure I'm not gonna be too ham-fisted, I will show you guys how I do these. Okay, so here we go. I think I'm properly warmed up, and you can see I'm just sneaking up on it. And that's what it looks like on the underside, and that's actually, I'm pretty stoked with that. What I hope you noticed is that I was not trying to airbrush on this side that I'm actually on the surface that I'm actually doing the streak, and traveling along that surface, but rather that I was pointing it at an angle that kind of goes up and away from the surface. And then I'm moving the airbrush basically across the opening. And what that does is it concentrates the spray right around the gun port itself, which is what I want, and allows it to trail back naturally like that. And I actually didn't realize that it was working on both sides at the same time. I thought I was only getting it on the top side, which is fine, because I think they tend to be heavier on the bottom for whatever reason, and I'm actually really happy with the way that that looks right there. So, hey, when it's good, just go with it. And I will lock that in with some more GX113 when I do the when I do the same thing. When I do the same thing, yeah, what's wrong with my face? I can't talk. When I lock the exhaust stains in, I will also take care of locking in these powder burns. So that's that for the moment. The next thing is going to be a little bit more oil work on some very specific kind of targeted spots, but I need to mix up some oils for that, so we'll come back to that later. Okay, so we are back at it, and I have made some more additions. One thing that I did, I was not super happy with these two streaks right here in the middle. They just weren't right. They didn't match everything else, so I redid them, and I literally redid them 10 times. I started counting because it just became kind of a comedy of errors, and I just was not happy, and I was taking advantage of the fact that that ink wipes right off of there with 409, and so I just did it as many times as I had to, and it's a good thing I finally got it right, because right after that I dropped my trusty Sotar straight into the bench, and it literally punched a hole straight into the wood top. And while it doesn't look like there's anything wrong, something is definitely wrong. It is not spraying correctly anymore. I think that I shoved the nozzle back inside the head there, and there's no fixing that. Going to have to be replaced, and that is one of the disadvantages of an airbrush like that. The needle being out there in the breeze means that it is, yes, always in harm's way. But anyhow, these things happen. So there's that, and you will also notice that I have some staining going on here around the gun access ports. And I was going to demonstrate that on camera because that's just straight OPR, and but I got into a groove, and when I'm in that mode I just kind of have to go with it because, you know, it's kind of like this exhaust stain thing. You know, sometimes you're just more dialed in. For me, this is a phenomenon that I'm familiar with from my motorcycle racing days. Some days you just have it, and some days you just don't, and you have to recognize on the days you don't what your limitations are, and, you know, try to stay within those. And so I kind of, you know, feel like when I know that I'm in the zone, that it's a good thing for me to just carry on, even if that means that I have to skip something that I want to demonstrate on camera. I also added some smudges around all of these Zeus fasteners on the chin piece. But never fear, because I still have a spot where I can demonstrate that little bit of oil work. So what I have is just basically a mix of the black and the brown that I consistently use for dirty hand smudges. And what I want to do with that, this was mixed up yesterday, so most of it is dry. All right, this stuff, these blacks and browns, when they're mixed like this in a thin layer, that's dry after 24 hours. But there's still enough of it in the part of the dish where it's kind of piled up that I can get some on my brush, especially if I use a little bit of mineral spirits. So I'm going to just work some of that up and make a little puddle of material here. And again, I'm not trying to get it super thin. I don't want it to be anything like a wash. I just want it to be good, smooth paint that will, you know, kind of grab onto the surface, soak into that flat finish a little bit. Okay, you can see that it's a nice dark brown, and I've got a little bit of it on my brush. So where am I going to put that? All right, hold on a second. Let me get situated here, and I will demonstrate. Okay, so right here, all right, this little door, hold on, we're not properly on camera, of course. All right, I just had to stop and get myself situated properly. Okay, so right here on this little door, and this is the first aid kit and radio access door. Probably not, probably not something they got into every single day, but nonetheless, there's still going to be some dirty hands. So I'm just going to take my mix here and just create some smudges around the edges of this. And you want it to be a pattern, but as I've said before, with things like this, you're looking for chaos within the pattern. So it has to look natural. All right, so once you've got that in place, now it's time to tune it up to the level of contrast that you want. And this number 2 combo brush is a great one to get the process started. So you can see I'm just kind of stippling that and working the material into the surface. And for whatever reason, this will only get you so far. And part of the reason, part of that is because you're basically just adding more paint to these bristles, and you just kind of keep, moving it around and pushing it in there. But if that's the look you like, if you want a stain that's that heavy, then stop right there. But I don't. I don't really want this to be all that dramatic. So I'm going to now take my magic blender brush and I'm going to remove most, if not all of that. Oops. And I'm brushing downward because the lower portion of the fuselage is kind of dirtier anyway, and I want that. Now, that still is a bit more drama than I'm after. So, I have to get a little bit more medieval, and so what I will do is just get a Q-tip that's dry, and I'll just rub on that some more. And you can see that it is taking most of that off, and that's good, because all I really need there is a kind of a subtle sort of a stain. Again, I don't want it to be just super dramatic, but that's a matter of personal taste and how you're trying to tell the story. I mean, that's my motto. There is no such thing as over or under weathering. There's only good or bad storytelling. And what I want to tell is a little story of, hey, this is accessed by dudes with dirty hands, but not as often as these other places where dudes with dirty hands are getting into it. So it's kind of just setting up this relative thing that when a viewer is taking in the entire subject, they can kind of see the story that's being told, hopefully. So you can see that this is a pretty simple technique. There's really nothing magic about it. It really just comes down to placement and scaling, and then making a good decision with the colors and how much you tone the effect to suit your overall personal aesthetics and your style and all of that. And this is where style comes from, is in how you make these decisions and the combined total of all of those things over the entire surface of the workpiece. Now, there's another effect that I've done that you may have noticed. I've got some speckling going on in these areas. You can see some little bitty tiny dots, hopefully. So that's a pretty straightforward technique as well. And as soon as I plug the camera in, so that the battery doesn't die on me in the middle of demonstrating this, I'll show you, but I'm going to show you over here on the mule, because this is a technique that can easily get out of hand. And I've already done about as much as I think I'm going to on the actual thing here. So what I'm going to do is, and again, this is one of my favorite things about oils, because you start out with the material straight out of the tube, and you can work with that. You can definitely do things with it just like that. But you have an infinite amount of variability just by adding mineral spirits. So what I'm going to do is just get this. This is kind of one of my cheapo workhorse brushes, and I'm going to go to that same spot where I was making my little mix for the stain that I just made, and I'm going to start adding thinner to it. Then, once I've got some in the brush, now, very simple, just a little stick or something, and flick those bristles. And see what I've got right there instantly. That's a pretty nice stain. I like the density of it. I like the color of it. And how far away you hold the stick, you know, that obviously has an effect in how far the droplets are going to spread. So when you need to control it to a really small area, you got to hold it up close, and you got to be really, you know, cautious with how you work. And if you get some of these little speckles in places that you don't want them, don't hesitate to remove them, and even, you know, getting into, you know, specific ones here and there, because that will help you define the pattern yet retain the chaos within that pattern. Also, I hope you recognize that with you know, the same application of thinner to the material, I can also now start to create stains that are very translucent, like the fuel stain that I created there on the side of the fuselage and around the gas cap. And you can take advantage of the way that mineral spirits migrates on a flat finish when you do that. Sometimes tide marks are actually a good thing. One of the most important things that I wanted to do with these tetraethyl lead stains is show what I see a lot in reference photos. And that is that apparently these RAF ground crew guys were slobs who like to dump gasoline all over the sides of their airplanes. Because what happens is that because those deposits are just kind of a soft surface ash, they get rubbed off and certainly washed off by fuel running down the side of the aircraft there pretty easily. And I want to try to illustrate that. So what I did is I created a very thin fuel stain mix using the black and the brown oils, and basically just positioned it, you know, kind of worked it around the fuel filler cap there, and then positioned it on the side of the fuselage, and surface tension kind of holds it there. And then I use this Wisp brush to kind of shape that. And you want something that's got kind of thin, scratchy bristles like that. And then basically I just pulled the mineral spirits down through the gray oil to create that look of rivulets of fuel running down through there. And I tied the plane down so that it was at the, about the right angle for the way it would sit on the ground. And so hopefully created an authentic sort of gravity effect where it, runs down towards the back there and then kind of, just spreads out, wicks around. So I think that worked out okay. I'm cool with it. Okay, so there you go, gang. I hope you're, finding this useful and informative. If you've stayed tuned for all 19 episodes so far, I really appreciate it. I think episode 20 is going to end up being the last one because I feel pretty much done with all the work on the airframe itself. And now all I have to do is add all of the bits. And I've been working on those on the side. I've chipped the propeller. It took a little bit of work because I was lazy and waited like 5 days after I painted it, but I got it done. And I've got a little bit of oil work to do on the prop, the exhausts, and the wheels. And we'll look at that on the next episode. And then I think that'll probably be it. I'll put the thing together, take some final pictures, and we'll call it good. Finally. So, anyway, as always, I definitely appreciate you guys watching. Much love.